Welcome to the Fierce Kind Mama of Multiples podcast. This podcast is for anyone raising multiples, twins, triplets, or more. I speak to inspiring parents of multiples who have healed from unexpected pregnancies and birthing experiences and who candidly share the highs and lows of raising multiples. I also speak to the professionals that work with multiple birth families. Together, we cover the practicalities of raising more than one baby at a time, as well as enhancing the emotional well-being of caregivers and children alike. Come join us as we laugh, cry, and share our personal and professional wisdom on all things multiples. I'm your host, Dr. Christina Kvetsa, and I am a fierce, kind mama of multiples. On today's episode, I'm joined by Shauna Leven. Shauna is the CEO of Twins Trust. Twins Trust is a charity based in the UK that offers many services for multiple birth families. Shauna has worked in senior management roles in the charity sector for more than 10 years. She's also a human rights lawyer, a successful campaigner and strategist, but her most important role, as she says, is mom to boy-girl twins. On today's episode, Shauna shares with us how Twins Trust was formed and the many ways that this charity supports multiple birth families. If you are based in the UK and you haven't checked out the amazing work that Twins Trust is doing, then be sure to head over to their website. You can find the link in the podcast show notes. I had such a wonderful time connecting with Shauna and hearing more about Twins Trust. I have so much admiration for professionals like Shauna who juggle the demands of raising their own multiples while working to better the lives of other multiple birth families. I hope you enjoy this episode. So welcome, Shauna. Lovely to have you here.
Thanks. It's so nice to be here.
We were just speaking before I pressed record about the time difference. So I'm in nighttime and it is like pitch black outside, and I can see where you are. There's lovely sort of sunlight coming through the window. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here today.
Absolutely. Yeah, Twins Trust is based in London, so it's just coming up on lunchtime here.
Yes, lovely. Why don't we start with you telling us a bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Sure. So my name is Shauna Leven. I'm the Chief Executive of Twins Trust. We are the UK charity that supports twins, triplets, and more and their families. We were started about 40 years ago, and we have been supporting thousands of families since then. I think we have over 100,000 families in our database. As you'll know, twins and triplets, the prevalence of which have increased a lot over the past couple of decades. So that number has obviously grown a lot more recently. And I should say, even though we are based in the UK, we do actually have families that we support all over the world. And in particular, in Australia, I know you guys have TAMBA, which does an amazing job as well of representing multiple families in Australia. But we do have a community there as well. So it's really nice to be here today.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing all of that. I have quite a few questions off the back of that when you were speaking. First, I didn't actually realize that Twins Trust services, if you like, families around the world.
Yeah, so I think, this isn't substantiated by anything, but from what I understand, we're one of the largest organizations in at least the English-speaking world that does the kind of work that we do. We have about 30 staff members on payroll. And so I know there are twin and multiple associations in the US, in Canada, and Australia, New Zealand. I think they're mostly smaller. And so we are very happy to provide resources and support to families that just need a little bit extra from anywhere. And actually, we have, interestingly, communities that pop up in different places. I think we've got a few in Eastern Europe. We get occasional inquiries from Asia. Definitely support families in a lot of different places, particularly, sadly, on the bereavement side of things. We have bereaved families from all over the world that use our service. So it's a big and interesting and diverse community.
Yeah, right. And when you said 30 staff members on the payroll, I thought, wow, that's fantastic, because I know in the context that I'm in, we were speaking actually about this before I hit record. I'm originally from Canada, but based in Australia. And I know that I've done some volunteer work for my local chapters of the Australian Multiple Birth Association, but it's largely, as far as I understand, volunteer run and led. So for you to have actual that that many number of people on staff, that's quite remarkable. How did the charity begin?
So it was founded, as I said, it's actually probably almost 45 years ago now, by a woman called Judy Linney, who was a nurse in South Africa, and she moved to the UK, and found out shortly after that she was expecting twins. And she was really quite, I think, saddened and shocked to find out how little information there was for people expecting twins. And I think in particular, after she brought her girls home, how little information there was for new parents of twins, and how ill-equipped the world was to support families with twins. I think there's an anecdote about her not being able to go to the shops on her own because double buggies weren't allowed in her local supermarket. And so she set up with a doctor and with some other parents an association that was then called TAMBA, the Twins and Multiple Births Association, to help to really coordinate. There was already a network of twin clubs in existence, and to help coordinate twin clubs to be a national voice for families of twins and multiples, and also to support those clubs in supporting their local families. And she's still our president today. I'll see her tomorrow, actually. So she's still involved in the work, and it's really wonderful to still have that connection.
Yeah, that's amazing. So how has Twins Trust, formerly TAMBA, as you were saying, how has it evolved over the years?
So, I mean, I haven't been around for the whole evolution, but I think it started again as this kind of coordinating voice for the local network of clubs. And I would imagine as the prevalence of twins and multiples grew in the population, the need grew. And I believe, the service started to professionalize maybe 10 years after its founding, developing information and leaflets, things like that for families. Of course, this was digital service delivery, and then extended its work into a volunteer-run helpline. And then after that, we started providing more resources for healthcare professionals, started running courses, and now we have a kind of two kind of fully fledged prongs, one focused on families, one focused on healthcare professionals, and then we also do policy work and advocacy on the national level.
Yeah, right. Okay. And so I know before we hit record as well, we were talking about the fact that you are not from London originally. So tell us a bit about how you found yourself in the role of CEO of Twins Trust.
So I am from the United States. I'm from New York. I originally trained and practiced as a lawyer. And after that, I went into kind of human rights and international development, which I did for a while, here in the UK mostly. And then I had my twins in 2018 and took some time out after that, and really didn't know what I wanted to do after that. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back into the charity nonprofit sector or not. And so when I kind of thought that it was time to go back, I really wanted to do something that I was very personally passionate about. And, when this role came up, it felt like a really natural fit because I had young twins at that point myself, and, just really understood firsthand some of the challenges that our families can face. So it was a really nice and organic fit.
Yeah, yeah, wow. You spoke a bit about, some of the challenges that multiple birth families face. And I imagine that, you've heard from many multiple birth families as the CEO of Twins Trust, and you hear a lot of stories. And what are some of the challenges that multiple birth families face in the UK? What do they experience?
I'm sure it's not too dissimilar to the challenges they face everywhere. I think it fundamentally stems just from a lack of appreciation of how challenging it can be to experience a multiple pregnancy and then raise, multiples. Beyond that, from the moment you find out you're expecting multiples, you're told this is a high-risk pregnancy, you're likely to deliver early, you're very possibly going to have complications. You certainly have to attend more hospital appointments, which can be very disruptive to your work or to your other children. to your life. So it starts there. And if you're lucky enough to have an uncomplicated pregnancy and to deliver on time, which is a small proportion of our families, you're still dealing with the challenges of coming home from hospital, often recovering from surgery, and then caring for more than one baby at a time with, in a system, a social care, a healthcare system that doesn't fully appreciate how challenging that can be. And of course, if you're not fortunate enough to have a simple and uncomplicated pregnancy, you can spend time on bed rest, you can spend time in hospital. A vast majority of our families spend time either in special care, which we call kind of pre-NICU services here in the UK, or in NICU. And actually, some of our families have to deal with being in more than one NICU. They'll have one baby in one hospital and another baby somewhere else in the country, and babies in NICUs for different lengths of time. And of course, if you're bringing home babies with special needs while you're also recovering yourself, I can go on and on, I think. But once you're home, dealing with, again, kind of feeding challenges, the cost of living can be a real stress point for our families. Getting out of the house is a real milestone. It seems kind of straightforward if you've only brought one baby at a time home, but it's obviously much more complicated if you're trying to get out and about with two babies or more babies. And then it kind of extends into finding childcare, either finding places or affording the cost, heading back to work, sorting out school placements and making sure you get placements in the same school if that's what you want, or in same class, different classes, and all the way through individualization and adulthood. The challenges go on. So I think, the biggest kind of umbrella over all of that is just this lack of understanding and appreciation of all of those challenges, which means that the system is kind of just not set up for our families.
Yeah. And when you were speaking, I was thinking how much that resonates with the experience of many multiple birth families that I know, myself included, here in Australia. But even from what I've heard of speaking to people from different countries, what do you think are some of the ways that there can be more equity for multiple birth families within the structure? I mean, is it within the structure we have, or do you think there needs to be systemic changes? I mean, from your experience in the UK, where you're based.
I think, first of all, we need more research into both the complications around multiple pregnancies, but also many of the interventions that are kind of thought of as normal interventions in pregnancy have never actually been researched in multiple pregnancies. So, one kind of semi-hot topic here in the UK right now is the practice of giving a steroid injection right before delivery, if delivery is going to be before a certain date and the babies are under a certain weight. I'm not a doctor, so don't quote me on the specifics. But that is often presented as a standard practice. Yet actually it hasn't been researched to the extent that we understand the consequences of giving that steroid injection. We do know that there can be some benefits in singleton pregnancies of a certain category, but in multiple pregnancies, there's just not enough research to really understand whether that's going to be helpful and if there are any potential adverse outcomes. So research is definitely the starting point, but it really goes on from there. I think better training and more appreciation in healthcare professionals. So we have lots of amazing healthcare professionals here that really, really do understand multiple births and the challenges associated with multiple births. But unfortunately, not every hospital or maternity unit has folks like that working in them. And we've heard stories from our families, where it's really clear that there is a very small understanding of the kinds of things multiples face. And unfortunately, stillbirth and neonatal death rates reflect this here in the UK. They're significantly higher than they are for singletons, which is just an absolute tragedy. And associated to that, better training for bereavement care staff who may not understand the nuances of potentially grieving for one or more babies while having one or more living babies at the same time is a real challenge for families that are sadly bereaved. And then, again, kind of the maternity leave system here, while it is generous compared to some other countries, doesn't make any exceptions for having more than one baby at the same time. So that may mean that compared to somebody that's had two babies at different times, somebody's getting significantly less leave and less paid leave than a peer with one baby. Although we have had some recent advances on neonatal leave and pay here, which is an issue that we campaigned for. So parents now, when this piece of legislation comes into effect, will be able to take paid leave if they have babies in neonatal care. So that's fantastic. And that piece of legislation actually does allow leave for each baby in neonatal care. So that's really a breakthrough in terms of the kind of care offerings that are available here. And, it kind of goes on from there. We've had families tell us that the health visiting service here, which again, by and large, I think does a great job, but there just really can be a lack of understanding of what it means to bring home more than one baby at a time. Helping parents in feeding support is a big issue that we hear about a lot. And simple challenges, getting out of the house, especially for our triplet families. How do you do that? Especially if you're living in a flat with, a lift or stairs, or, you've got to get three babies into a car at the same time, things like that. So really, really practical things, a better understanding of those sorts of things through the social care system, I think would help us to have a more comparable quality of life, which of course is, what equity is all about. And then all the way up through kind of school choice and again, kind of understanding the challenges that adolescent and adult multiples may face through the education system. It really does boil down to, I think, understanding.
Yeah, and I'm hearing that a lot from what you're saying, that there does need to be greater awareness of the issues faced by multiple birth families. I wonder, how does Twins Trust, because you mentioned you kind of two-pronged, you work with families themselves, so the individual parents and the kids, but also with health professionals. Can you tell us a bit about that aspect of it? How do you work with health professionals? What kind of services do you provide there?
Absolutely. So we have resources for health professionals, and that includes courses and webinars and study days, often for CPD credit, which is continuing professional development credit, which is really important. And these cover everything from, complications in a multiple pregnancy to perinatal care to bereavement care, all sorts of things like that. So that's fantastic. And we're getting a lot of interest in that at the moment. So that's great to see that so many folks out there are interested in learning more about multiple births. And then we also have a project called the Maternity Engagement Project. This is something we launched 7 years ago with Department of Health funding at the time, although now it's an independent project. And this is a program by which we invite units to be audited by us, and we audit them in against what are called the NICE guidelines, which are the government guidelines for standard of care here in the UK. So we will go into a unit and they will provide us, with a series of records and documents, and we will say, at the end of the audit, this is, how well you're doing against the NICE guidance, and here's an improvement plan if you need it, and we'll be back to see you again in a period of time. And it's actually coming out of the original kind of funded period. We wrote a report called NICE Works that shows significant reductions in stillbirth, in neonatal death rates. And it's, again, it's really well received by most units, I would say. There's a lot of interest in participating in it, even though hospitals actually have to pay for the program themselves now. And I think this is largely driven by, the midwives and the clinicians that just really want to do the best job they can when it comes to multiple births. So it's a great project. But yeah, other than that, we have courses and webinars, lots of resources. We have a newsletter that goes out to healthcare professionals that tells them about different things our families are talking about. So, and we facilitate kind of online peer-to-peer support communities. So lots of work with the healthcare community.
Hi there, Fierce Kind Mama. Sorry to interrupt the discussion, but I have something to share with you that I know you're going to love. We're often told that parenting can be hard, and whether you're a soon-to-be or current parent of multiples, there is going to come a time when you will probably feel stressed, overwhelmed, or even worried about the future. That's why I've developed a free guide for parents just like you with my 5 top tips for handling stress and overwhelm. You can download it now from my website, fiercekindmama.com. Yeah, all of that sounds amazing. A lot of great initiatives there. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the services you provide for multiple birth families, because I know you have a number of different, specialist services, if you like, things for dads, things specifically for breastfeeding. Could you talk a little bit about some of those?
Absolutely. So yeah, at Twins Trust, we think about our family services in terms of information, facilitating community, and then providing bespoke support where those aren't enough. So our information starts with our website, where everything we offer is evidence-based and really pragmatic. So that can be simple, informational articles to stories from other families to toolkits. We offer courses, both in person and digital, recorded courses and online courses as well, from early pregnancy all the way through the full antenatal course to, I'm not supposed to call it hypnobirthing, but hypnobirthing for multiples. And then into the behavioral aspects of raising, especially small children, toilet training and other, sleep issues, things like that. So a whole range of courses. We have a volunteer-run helpline called Twin Line, and that is, again, manned by our volunteers, but they've all been trained and are experts in certain areas. So, and you can email in your queries or call during our opening hours. We facilitate online communities. Again, these are based predominantly around need. So things like single parents, special needs. There's the expectants group as well, the under ones group, and these are places for folks to exchange ideas and support each other essentially and meet other multiple parents. We also have geographically focused ones. So we have, Northern Ireland one, Scotland one, Wales one, that sort of thing. I think we have maybe 16 in all. And then where, again, those two things aren't enough, we have a family crisis service and our bereavement service. So family crisis service is really aimed at families that kind of find themselves in the most difficult situations. For example, a parent has died, or we've had a family recently a triplet single parent family who had been provided a home by their local council that was infested with mold and causing health issues for the children. So, in that case, we worked with the family to advocate the government to move them and find them more suitable housing, that sort of thing, while also providing the kind of practical support that a single parent triplet family needs. And then on the bereavement side of things, we offer bereavement befriending. So we match bereaved families with people that have been through a similar experience. And we also run an online community and have other initiatives there as well. So lots of work, again, with families. And this extends, I haven't talked about it as much, but all the way through kind of the issues faced by folks with older multiples, teens, things like one passes their driving test and the other doesn't. I think it sounds a bit silly, but for anybody that has older twins or multiples, they'd probably appreciate the issues that might cause in a family. So yeah, a whole host of support for families.
Yeah, there's so much there that I think is, amazing and so beneficial. And I think a lot of times we focus or we think about the early years and that's really where our focus needs to be. When they're infants, it's much harder, or, I think that's the perception. But as you highlighted, there are unique challenges that happen along the way that can still be quite difficult for families to navigate. Um, how would you support a family in that is where the multiples are further along? Let's say it is an issue like you brought up with the one passing their driving test and the other one not. How does Twins Trust actually come in and support that family? What do you offer there?
I think, that's a sort of silly example, but you know, more sort of real life examples include things like relationships. Twins often have a unique relationship, and then as they grow into adults, they need to learn to navigate relationships with other people as well as with each other, and that can cause rifts in the twin bond, rifts in other, in the marital relationship, things like that. The kind of help we would provide, I think, would really depend on the specific situation, but we certainly have information available on the basics of dealing with these situations, which really starts in early childhood with the idea of helping your twins become individuals that have their own personality and their own likes and dislikes. But that would be, I would think, a really interesting example for our helpline. A lot of our helpline volunteers have expertise in older multiples and in adult multiples. And that's the kind of thing that we would just really tailor a response for. So yeah, it's an interesting one, and the challenges certainly don't end, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And I know, I was intrigued to hear about the breastfeeding peer support service that you offer, and I think that's it's such a wonderful way for particularly for first-time moms to learn how to breastfeed from other mothers. Could you speak a bit about that service, what it looks like, how it came about, what it looks like practically for families, and how that support is delivered and received?
Sure. So it's actually feeding support. We really stress at Twins Trust that whatever works for the family is the right way to feed. And I think, I don't have the stats to hand, but I think the vast majority of our families do end up combination feeding. So feeding some breast milk, some formula, some breast, some bottle. I think that's a really common experience, particularly in the UK, where unfortunately, the support that parents get in learning how to breastfeed is often just not enough when you're dealing with small or premature infants and more than one. So the service, I don't know the origin story of the service, but clearly there is a need. Because so many of our families come to us with challenges feeding, and these challenges range from establishing feeding to not feeding the way they'd like to. A lot of our families really want to breastfeed and just find it really, really hard to get there. And all of our volunteers are accredited feeding specialists, and our peer-to-peer supporters are similarly trained by us, and it just is a great way of helping people to deal with the unique feeding challenges that they may have. I remember when my kids were really little, I was also combination feeding, but trying to breastfeed, and at about 4 months, we took them on an international flight, and I was really worried about feeding them on the plane, like how that was going to work. Are they, is it going to be different? How to position them in a small airplane seat, that sort of thing. And I was able to get support for just, learning a few different feeding positions that would work in a small kind of cramped space like that. So yeah, it's just that sort of, oh, I've had this experience too. Let me help you with what worked for me, sort of service. So it's great, and I think so much of our network is really thrilled to give back in that way, share their tips, share what worked for them and what didn't work for them. That it's a real, it really underpins a lot of what we do at Twins Trust.
Yeah, and I think that that can't be understated, right? That support that you can get, knowledge that you can get from people who have done it themselves. So, yeah, I think that's really invaluable. Um, I know that there was a report actually published by the Education Committee in the UK earlier this year that looked at a number of issues, including childcare funding. And I remember you earlier on in the discussion today mentioning that being one of the key challenges for families, multiple birth families. I know even in my own personal experience and in speaking with a lot of other multiple birth families here in Australia, that is such a big issue. Going back to work, trying to find childcare spots when you have more than one baby is such a challenge, or can be anyway, particularly if you want the ideal situation, which is them starting at the same time and being at the same childcare center so that you're not having to navigate, pick up and drop off at 2 or 3 different locations. I wonder if you could speak to that report and what it means for the multiple birth families that your charity supports and works with.
Yeah, so the government announced a package of reform for childcare provision in England earlier this year. I think it was in March, um, which was a positive step. I think every parent of young children in the UK right now, or in England at least right now, was happy to hear that this was on the government's radar. It was on the agenda. We don't think that the childcare provisions that they have announced at this point goes far enough. As you said, a lot of mums in particular, but it does also affect dads, are just struggling to get back into work if that's what they want to do, because of the lack of availability and particularly lack of affordability of childcare places. I think for a lot of parents, the math just doesn't add up. You think about going back to work and you just have to look at how much you're ultimately going to be taking home after paying the exorbitant cost of childcare most places in the UK. And the answer is written on the wall, as they say. So again, we're pleased it's on the agenda, but we have to make sure that the government goes far enough in terms of funding this program, but also ensuring that the quality of the childcare people get and the places available aren't, is adequate. And in particular, that the kind of the most disadvantaged families are included in this. There are some kind of unique characteristics to the way childcare provision is made here in the UK. For example, at the moment, there's no exception for people in full-time education. So you might qualify for childcare benefits if you're under a certain income, but not if that's because you're in full-time education, which just doesn't make a lot of sense. So we're working on some things like that. But really, we just need the offer, particularly for 1- and 2-year-olds, to work financially, to work from the point of view of the child and from child development, and from the point of view of the workforce. The workforce here is unfortunately very undervalued. I think it's one of the most important jobs in the world, one of the hardest jobs in the world. And unfortunately, what we hear from the workforce is that they, often feel like people see them as babysitters, not educators. And so these 3 kind of factions have come together in a coalition to make sure that all 3 of our political parties, if you think about the Conservatives, Labour, and the Liberal Democrats, are really considering the needs of all of these communities. And for us, the needs of multiples is, even that much more. So we're very committed to changing things for parents of multiples when it comes to finding affordable childcare. I think we have a long road ahead of us. We have an election coming up, but I think that will probably be the tip of the iceberg. But again, we're happy that it's on the agenda and, that we have the space to talk about it right now.
And from your point of view, what would be the ideal outcome? for multiple
Fully funded,
families.
fully funded childcare for every child, before they start school, I suppose. It's that would be the ideal. There shouldn't have to be a choice between, if you think about it from the perspective of, the primary caregiver, the mother in most cases will have invested a lot in her career at that point, and for her to have to kind of leave the workforce because she can't afford to give her child, the same leg up on the education system that she may or may not have had, I suppose, is a real shame. And I think the costs of not being able to return to work, if that's what you choose to do, they only compound from there. You may not go back for some years, you may go back part-time, you may then lose out on kind of advancement opportunities, and overall a family's finances can be impacted for years to come, which will of course then impact on the child's development and the child's opportunities. So it's the long-term benefits of funded childcare, I think, really, it's a kind of it's a no-brainer, but I guess we have to find the money and make the argument.
Yeah, and I'm all for that argument. I totally agree with you. I think even from personal experience, I know that was a huge thing for me, that having twins meant I couldn't return to my professional career in the same capacity that I was completing, prior to having children. And that was a huge adjustment, I think, really, that having to return to work in a part-time capacity, then having to kind of even just switch jobs entirely because it just wasn't working out. So I think I really think that's such a big focus for multiple birth families. Absolutely.
And interestingly, one of the things, we've heard, there's a staffing crisis right now in the healthcare service, the NHS. And interestingly, part of the problem there is childcare. Midwives in particular work these long shifts. And who can find 12-hour childcare? Who wants 12-hour childcare? You don't want that. So there's like whole systemic changes, I think, that need to be made to rebalance the system that we've created here in the UK and allow people like early years workers, early years educators, and midwives to actually do the work that they've trained to do and want to do while also taking care of their own families. So there's a long road ahead, I think. But, again, we're happy that people in charge have started to realize that this is such a big problem for us.
Yeah, and I think even the pandemic really affected a lot of things too. I know here in Australia, in the profession, I was working as a psychologist, and we had to go completely to telehealth, so online therapy, and at home. There was a period of time when you were confined to your home, and I had, at that point, my children probably would have been 3 or 4 years old, and yeah, no, 4 years old. And so there was just no way that I could effectively work from home with them not, wanting to burst into the room. And when I'm on a confidential therapy call, I found that really difficult. And I wonder, how did the pandemic, I imagine there were many effects of the pandemic on families, but what has been the legacy of that in terms of what you've noticed in your speaking with the multiple birth families that you speak to?
Well, interestingly, the government here in the UK is currently holding an inquiry into how a whole variety of, parts of the government responded to the pandemic, from, provision of PPE. But we're engaged in responding to we're responding to the part of the inquiry that's looking into how maternity services were delivered, along with a coalition of other organizations. And I think, from the perspective of healthcare, our families were really impacted by not being able to be accompanied to appointments, particularly if they were going to be receiving bad news, but also to, particularly giving birth on their own, and then needing to care for one or more babies on their own during, the height of the pandemic, I think was an incredibly difficult experience for a lot of families. And then, if you're thinking about kind of post-birth experiences, our families already report feeling isolated because it is that much more difficult to get out of the house and to do the things that, other folks who are home kind of taking care of one baby can do with ease, going to the library, going to the swimming pool, things like that. It's so much harder if you've got more than one baby. And I think that sense of isolation was really compounded, that sense of, not really having anybody else to turn to that really understands what you're going through, was really compounded. And of course, if you go up to kind of school age children, I think the impacts, we're still seeing the impacts of, home education and that sort of thing. And I'm sure that will unfold for a long time. From Twins Trust perspective, I think it forced the issue of digital service delivery, which I think has actually ended up really being a positive for us and for the community we support, because it means we can extend our reach so much further than the southeast of England. Before the pandemic, it was a given that courses happened in person, and that meant, they could really only be delivered in kind of population centers where you had a critical mass of multiple birth families that could attend. Otherwise, it really, was difficult to kind of to run courses. And so now, that we have online courses, again, I've said this means we get families from all over the world attending and able to kind of take advantage of that offering. So although it sometimes feels a little bit less personal to do things digitally, and we're all tired of being online all the time, it actually has allowed us to reach so many families that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to reach. So I think from that perspective, there's a bit of a silver lining.
Absolutely. And I think it is important to see that silver lining, and the importance of that. And it is such a positive thing that came out of something very difficult, but something that I think is important. You spoke a bit about the campaigns, a number of campaigns that Twins Trust is working on behalf of multiple birth families. What are some of the campaigns, and what are you hoping to achieve that we might not have already spoken about?
So childcare in early years is definitely a focus for us at this point in time. It's such a big issue for our families. We have this window where the government is listening, and we've got an election coming up where it's going to be one of the big issues. So that's definitely something we are doing a lot on right now. Again, I mentioned neonatal leave and care. We've worked on that with a charity called Bliss for a while now, and again have a piece of legislation that's received what's called royal assent here, which means it's going to become a law and going to come into force very soon. I think not soon enough for some of our families, but soon, which means from, I think, about 2025, families that have one or more babies in neonatal care will receive paid leave. Of course, there's certain qualifications to that. But other than that, we are working on responding to the COVID inquiry again to make sure our families' voices are heard. And we're actually about to do a survey for our families to tell us a bit more about some of the other issues that they'd like us to be active on. So if you follow Twins Trust on social media, or if you get our emails, keep an eye out for that, because we're going to be asking lots of questions about the challenges that people have faced and what they'd like to see done. But other potential ideas are working with the health visiting service to educate more health visitors about the challenges of having multiples. Again, working with midwifery service to make sure more midwives understand the challenges associated with expecting and having multiples, that sort of thing. So lots going on.
Yeah, and such important work. Where can people find out more about Twins Trust?
Our website's a great place to start. So www.twinstrust.org. We have very active Facebook communities and an Instagram account. I think Instagram is at Twins Trust. I couldn't quote you the Facebook communities. There's many of them, but we do have a main Facebook page, and then you can find our other communities from there. So again, we have everything from expectants to under ones to special needs, geographical location, things like that. At dads, I think we mentioned dads earlier. So there's lots of kind of bespoke communities available if you're interested in hearing from people in a situation like your own.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today and your willingness to speak to what the work that you do, the important work that you do. And thank you so much for the work that you do for multiple birth families. It's been a pleasure having you here today.
It's been such a pleasure. It's so lovely to talk about Twins Trust and help make sure that people who might benefit from our services are aware of what we offer and what we can do. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you've heard, then please follow and leave a review so that other expectant and current parents of multiples like yourself can find this podcast and the valuable information it contains. I'd be so very grateful if you left a review and shared this with anyone you think could benefit from listening. If you have a particular topic you'd like me to cover on this podcast, feel free to reach out to me via my website, fiercekindmama.com. New episodes are released every second Wednesday, so I'll see you back here real soon. Any advice and information in this podcast is general only and has been prepared without taking into account your particular circumstances and needs. For tailored, individualized advice, please consult with a qualified professional.